Hello, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Jobs Fund Masterclass. My name is Najwa, and I am the head of the Jobs Fund. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome all of you to this particular masterclass on the ABC PIMP. Many of you have attended our introduction to this 11th funding call, where we've taken you through the term sheet. And now we get down to the business end of how to complete your application form and how to specifically complete the ABC PIMP. This is really this particular document is at the heart of your application. So I'm very pleased that so many of you have registered for this particular session this morning. And if you have registered, you would have received the project example that my team is going to be using today to help explain how to complete the ABC PIMP. You would have seen when you joined the session this morning, we invite you to post your questions in the chat, and my team and I will try our best to respond to those questions. But I really encourage you to open up the example that was sent to you, and in a very practical way, let my team assist you and demonstrate how to complete it. As I've said, this particular document that you're going to be completing really is it lies at the heart of your application. It asks of all of you to think through what you are wanting to do, how you are going to do it, what the related activities are, what your key milestones are going to be, and of course how you are going to cost those. So it really sets out your results chain. And if you take a step back, think about how you want to implement your project, understand the key activities, understand how those key activities must result and deliver your key milestones, and then also to understand exactly how much everything is going to cost you, then you are going to be on a really good wicket in respect of submitting your application, and also having a deep appreciation for what it is going to require of you and your team to be successful in implementing this project. We also, from the previous session, there were many questions, and we've updated our frequently asked questions, and we've reposted that on the Jobs Fund website. And I do encourage you to look at that frequently asked questions, because many of the issues that you potentially want to raise has been covered there already. In this session, my team has based this training on the questions that you've actually asked in previous sessions. So hopefully today, this is simply a reinforcement to assist you in completing your application. So what we'll cover today is Buyo will take you through a kind of a bit of a refresher on the ABC PIMP, the key concepts and so forth. Then Zameli is going to take you through a practical example on how to complete it, and that is going to be followed with Eve and some other members of the Jobs Fund, and Eve is going to focus on the financial section. Then we'll just summarize and advise on if there's anything that we require you to do in respect of submitting your application on time, and we'll have some closing remarks. So good luck. It's a long day. I hope that as an applicant, you've brought your team with you today. Those people are going to be responsible for various aspects of the work, and hopefully by the end of this day, you'll be much clearer on how to complete this document, and really have an appreciation that this document sets the tone for how you're going to be approaching your project. So thank you very much, and good luck to all of you. And I now hand you over to Xavier Itziwa. He's the Director of Projects at the Jobs Fund. Xavier?
Thank you very much, Najwa, for that. Good morning, our potential partners, soon to be partners, once we have gone through the process and get approved. Welcome to our masterclass on the ABC PIMP session. As Najwa has indicated, we have come a long way. You recall that we first had a briefing session when the round just opened. Then later on followed that by the training session where we was focusing on the ABC PIMP. And today, as has been indicated, is an opportunity for us to go into more details with respect to the ABC PIMP. This session is coming at the right time. We are almost 2 weeks away from the close of the funding round on the 17th of July at 3 p.m. So it is important that we begin to tie the loose ends. We begin to see how our project is going to roll out and so forth. And in our first session today, I have Vuyo Techana, who is going to give us a recap on the ABC PIMP, covering issues such as activity, outputs, assumptions, and the targets. And following that, we have Zamile, who will then cover the results chain. Vuyo, over to you for the first part of the segment. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Xavier, and also to yourself, Najwa. Once again, a very warm good morning to everybody who has joined us today. Today, we're going to go through a very quick recap in terms of the theory around how we complete the ABC PIMP. We want to try as much as possible to sort of demystify the PIMP as a tool. I know a lot of people, are very scared of this thing. It's a monstrosity and so forth. But we want to try and demystify it by taking you through live examples that will probably help you to, to better fine tune how it is that you have started completing your own PIMPs in the meanwhile. For bandwidth, I'm going to just switch off my camera. I just wanted everybody to see who they're speaking to or speaking to them. And yeah, and then we'll shoot out. Great. So as I said, we're going to be, so we've spoken in the previous session around the ABC PIMP about these concepts that we see here. We've spoken about the identification of key activities of the anticipated project. What are the key activities that will result in this particular project realizing the objectives that it set for itself? So we've spoken about that. We've spoken about how those key activities translate into associated outputs. And how the timing of both these activities and these outputs are set out in the ABC PIMP. And of course, how the outputs themselves will result in specific goals and outcomes that the project ultimately wants to achieve. We have in this slide tried to highlight where the activities and outputs are found or located within the ABC PIMP. So within the ABC PIMP, you will see a section that speaks to project results chain. And of course, in relation to the outcomes, you'll see a section in the same tab that speaks to anticipated outcomes, which are constituted by program indicators as well as project-specific indicators. All of this, of course, activities and outputs are costed. And so we'll also take you through live demonstration of how it is that we go about costing for activities and outputs, which in turn will then give us our outcomes. Next slide, please, Delia. Right. So in then talking about some of these key concepts, we want to start off with activities. And within activities, we have activity categories, and we have sub-activities. The slide is not moving on my end, Delia. Do you want to just try again? There we go. Great. Thank you very much. But let's just go one back. There we go. Thank you very much. All right. So these terms should be familiar now to all of us as we would have started completing our ABC PIMP. And then, as I said, we start then with the two types of activities that we speak about in the ABC PIMP. The one is the activity categories. What are activity categories? So these are the broad milestones that projects would set out in the PIMP that would be the roadmap, as it were, toward the completion of that project's goals or objectives. So examples of activity categories are the recruitment of SMMEs, the selection of SMMEs, the training and the funding of SMMEs. So these are examples that relate to an enterprise development project that will be supporting small, medium, micro enterprises. And so that's how these broad categories would be set out, starting with the recruitment, followed by selection, training, and funding, right? So each of these activity categories will then have a related sub-activities. So in the example of the first broad step, which is the recruitment of SMMEs, you would have sub-activities that speak to the development of a recruitment strategy. So if you're going to recruit SMMEs, you need a strategy by which to go about doing that. Another sub-activity that you would have is the identification of the appropriate cohort of SMME that you want to target, right? So these sub-activities would be speaking to the who, the where, the how, as well as the target participants. So the point here that we're making is that you've got broad steps, activity categories. These activity categories in turn have associated sub-activities that support the realization overall of the activity category. So activity categories have a rational and a sequential vertical logic. We talk about a vertical logic in the ABC PIMP, of course, because you would start from the top and you work your way down in terms of the sequential flow of those broad categories. And just as a reminder, then, to say that activity category 7 is an activity that shouldn't be adjusted. That one is a non-negotiable. We do need to have it as it sits. Of course, it would need to be costed as per normal in respect of that particular project. Next slide, please. Right, so we've spoken to activity categories, and now we want to go on to talking about sub-activities. Sub-activities are those activities that together result in the achievement of a single milestone activity category. So the combination of the different sub-activities work then to bring about the realization of a key activity category. So if the key, again, the example that we just spoke to, if the activity category is the recruitment of SMMEs, the development of a strategy, as well as the methodology by which you want to identify a cohort of SMMEs, together work towards the achievement of that activity category, which is the recruitment of SMMEs, right? And sub-activities also need to be clearly defined in the ABC PIMP. There shouldn't be any ambiguity about what they are and how they support that specific activity categories. All sub-activities must relate to the activity category and must be, objectively be in support of that activity category. So sub-activities also should be set out sequentially for ease of reference and their review. And applicants can nominate up to 8 sub-activities in their PIMPs. Next slide, please. And now we want to come to outputs. Outputs are the result of the achievement of subactivities. There is one output that should be nominated for one subactivity. So in other words, if you've got a subactivity that relates to the development of a recruitment strategy, you can only have one output that speaks to that subactivity and no more. So you cannot have an output that talks to a developed recruitment strategy as well as a developed selection criteria. Those are two outputs that will then begin to confuse in terms of how it is that you target for that particular output. So we talk about one output for one subactivity, right? Outputs are expressed in the past tense, and then this just speaks to the nomenclature in terms of how these are expressed. And they're always expressed with a unit of measure. So when we talk about, when we are nominating an output, we have to talk about the number of something, or the tonnage of, the rand value of, or the hectares of something, right? So all your outputs must have a unit of measure that expresses them. Why? Again, because your target is a numeric value only on the ABC PIMP. So in order to be able to interpret and understand what the numeric value is, it's important for you to have a unit of measure as part of your output. At the end of all of the activity categories is an overall milestone output. This milestone output is critical in terms of being set out in a way that captures the essence of what that activity category is all about. So if the activity category in essence is about saying, in this milestone step, we are looking to recruit SMMEs in the main, right? Your milestone output must then capture that. It must capture the number of SMMEs that have been successfully recruited, because those milestone outputs, you will see later on, form part of your outcomes section of the ABC PIMP, and therefore are important in terms of tracking your progress towards overall objectives. Next slide, please. And now we come to assumptions. Now, assumptions relate to those specific key conditions or circumstances they need to obtain in order for the related output to be realized, right? So in the instance where we are talking about the development of a recruitment strategy, what is the assumption there? The assumption is that the organization can easily access capacity to undertake this particular task. So you need to nominate those assumptions, because you'll see why just now part of the importance of having assumptions. It's important for us to know that in order for us to have that output achieved, that the assumption for its achievement as it relates to your specific organization is the following. Assumptions should be reasonable, right, with a high likelihood to hold true. So if, as the example that we put here, if there is an assumption around the achievement of a particular output for your project that says that the South African economy is assumed to grow over the next 2 years by 5%, that is not a reasonable assumption, because we know where the South African economy is at in terms of its growth path. And so if we have an assumption like that, that speaks to the realization of a particular output, it means that already there's a red flag insofar as the likelihood of that output being realized. And that then speaks to the fact that assumptions are actually potential risks for the project in reverse, right? And so we need to see assumptions in that way. So we assume that there'll be certain conditions that hold in order for the realization of outputs. But if that assumption does not hold, what then happens? And so we encourage applicants to think through what are some of the mitigation measures that you would take or you would undertake in order to support the realization of an output should that particular assumption not hold. So it's important for assumptions to also have with them a mitigation statement to say, these are the contingencies that we will be putting in place should a particular target, or should a particular assumption not hold. Next slide, please. And now, so now we come to targets. As we've said, targets relate directly to the output. So it is important that the numeric target value that you enter in the ABC PIMP speaks to the output. The output, how it speaks to the output is that the output will have a unit of measure, right? So if you've got the number 500 on your target for Q1, the output will indicate to anyone who's looking at it to say, what does the 500 denote? Is it rand value or is it number of something? So it's important that there is that correlation between targets and outputs. Targets are, as I've said, of course, expressed in numeric value, and they are whole numbers, so there are no fractions in there, and that they correlate to the unit of measure of the output. And they also must be unique entries in a particular quarter. So the example that we give here is that if we're talking about the number of people completing training, and you anticipate that for the first year, you are going to have 50 people completing training per quarter. The way of expressing that 50 people, because ultimately you will have 200 people at the end of the year that you would want to have successfully completed training, is that you target 50 per quarter. You don't cumulate that 50 over the course of the different quarters. So for example, in Q1, you will have 50 people that successfully complete training, but in Q2, you won't add Q1's 50 people to Q2. You will add the unique new 50 people in Q2 who would be successfully completing training. Because if you add the previous quarter's number, you then distort your total. You will no longer have 200. You will have a different number now because you are adding, accumulating your target. And we have had numerous instances of of this previously, which renders projects non-competitive after a while, because then there's all of this confusion around the numbers. So it's very important that we understand that targets are unique instances of entry in the ABC PIMP. Right, and that lastly, in terms of targets, that they shouldn't be, when you're entering that 500 in Q1, you're not entering an R in front of the 500 to denote rand value, or another symbol that speaks to hectares, or whatever the case may be. It's just the number, because that number should then relate to the unit of measure that's associated with the output. Next slide, please. Right, and then so lastly, we want to speak to the project specific indicators. So over and above the program level indicators that speak to new jobs that are created in the market, that speak to placements, that speak to short-term jobs and so forth, we also invite applicants to nominate project specific indicators. Now, these are made of up of two parts. The first part is the milestone indicators that I spoke to earlier. These are the milestone indicators that automatically pull from each activity category that you would have completed. So they will just automatically pull in the tool to this particular section where we are now completing for anticipated outcomes. But the second category of project-specific indicators are the sustainability indicators. These are indicators that applicants will nominate themselves, and they help us to begin to trace the progressive realization of the sustainability of the benefits that draw from the intervention that we are rolling out, or that we plan to roll out. And again, sustainability indicators come in two parts. There's the sustainability of participants. An example of this is a number of SMEs still in operation, or number of SMEs that are securing new contracts for goods and services. So these indicators become proxies in assisting us to see whether there is efficacy in the intervention that will be rolling out. Because if you've got SMEs that continue to operate over a period of time, obviously they are staggered in terms of their takeoff and operation. And so those that would have started at the beginning of the intervention and remain in operation, that's a good sign for us to see that these are moving towards sustainability, and also the further securing of market share in terms of securing of new offtake contracts and so on is also a good sign towards sustainability for participants, right? And then an example of sustainability indicator for an intervention is number of incubation hubs, as an example in an agriculture setting, that reach a point of self-sustainability. These hubs, you would want to see that over time they wean themselves off of the need for a grant. So there has to be a path to sustainability for them to then continue beyond the grant. So these are some of the quick highlights, ladies and gentlemen, that we wanted to touch on. They will be further elucidated as my colleague Zamile continues to give us the live demonstration of the example that we've used. The example that Zamile is going to be taking you through relates, of course, to the example that was shared with everybody for this particular session. So with that, I want to say thank you very much. And maybe just before Zamile comes in, just to ask very quickly if there is any question that anyone has in terms of the section that I've just presented, to please just raise your hand, and we will try and respond to it, or you can post it on the chat. Thank you very much.
Vuyo, what I can see is that all the questions that have been posted in the chat have been answered.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Appreciate it. Over to you, Zamin.
Good morning, all. My name is Zamile Ngubo. I will be taking you through the completion of the ABC PIMP, making use of the example that was shared to all the registered delegates. I just want an indication if you can all see my screen that I'm sharing. Can you all see the screen?
Yes, Zamile, I see lots
Okay.
of thumbs up, so people can see your screen.
Okay.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Yes, I will now switch off my camera so that I can proceed with the presentation. All right, so we have shared an example of a project that is in the ICT sector. So this is a skills development project. So we have pre-populated, to save time, we have pre-populated the main activity category and the description of the sub-activities, as Vuyo was explaining. So Vuyo gave a good definitions of the activity categories, sub-activities, outputs, assumptions and targets. So my task today is to take you through on how to complete these and how to describe outputs, how to formulate assumptions, and how to target, making use of the example that was shared with everyone. So the first task that we had to do was to identify the main activity category. As you can see here, in this skills development program, we have to recruit candidates onto the program. So we have put that as an activity category. It's a broad milestone. Then there are associated sub-activities that will assist. So these are now smaller tasks that will assist in realization of the main output of this activity category. So here we have identified recruitment as a main activity category. Then these are the sub activities. So the first sub activity is to advertise the initiative into local newspapers, Sowetan, and via different social media platforms. So we need now to develop or describe an output that will be as a result of carrying out these sub activities. So the output here will be the number of adverts. It will be the number of adverts posted. So this is how we describe an output. So it must be in a past tense, as we was explaining. So after carrying out all these smaller tasks, we will have an output associated with that sub-activity. So here, in this case, will be the number of adverts posted. Adverts. There we go. The number of adverts posted. So we now need to formulate the assumptions. For this output to be realized, there must be assumptions that must be holding to realize the output. So the assumption here is that the advert will be placed twice in the local newspapers. Here in this case is Lohfelder. Lohfelder is a local newspaper in Mpumalanga. So, and we will post once in Sowetan. And twice in the Citizen. These are newspapers that we'll be using to advertise the opportunity for young people. So we have said we will advertise twice in the Lohfelder and twice in the Sowetan and once in the Citizen. So this means that now we'll be having 2 + 1 + 2. So this is equals 5. Then we'll also advertise in the social media platform. So social media twice a week. Through Twitter, Insta, and Facebook. So now this gives us 2 times 3 times 3, which gives us 18. So these are the assumptions that we are formulating to achieve the output. Now, adding all these, we will have a target of 23. So this must be achieved in the first period of implementation because this is the recruitment drive. So we need to select from the pool of the applications that we'll be receiving from the applicants, seeing the opportunity through these various mediums of communication. So the second sub-activity will be the testing of the walk-in application. So there will be different application processes. So we'll be having a walk-in, an online application system, and USSD application system to finalize receiving of applications. So young people apply for the initiative either by walking in, accessing the online system, or via this USSD system. So the output of this sub-activity will be the number of applications received through these various application processes. So we'll describe the output as the number of applications that will be receiving from the applicants. So this is how we describe an output. So the assumption for that, based on the previous initiative runs, based on the previous the response rate from the press is likely to be 100. So from the previous experience, we know that from the press, we will have 100 application or response rate. So this is now from the local newspaper. So this is the Lofelder, we're getting 100. Then we will be getting 200 from the Sowetan. And 150 from the Citizen. So we are also assuming that the social media campaign is likely to reach 5,000 young people. So let's put social media reach 5,000 youth. And from that 5,000, only 300 will apply. So this is our assumption. So when we add all these together, we'll get 750 applications. So this is a target associated with this output, which is the number of applications received. So we are assuming that we'll be receiving 750 applications from young people. I hope it is still clear. So moving along to the activity activity 1.3 will be the shortlisting. So from the pool of 750 applications, we will be shortlisting, sorting of applications based on the criteria as listed in the advert. So the criteria is the applicants must be between the ages of 18 to 35, live nearby the center in Nelspruit, and willing to be able to attend class-based training twice a week, and want to work in an ICT role, which is the information communication technology sector. So the output associated with this sub-activity will be the number of candidates shortlisted, because we'll be shortlisting from the 750 applications that we have received. Number of shortlisted candidates will be our output, under the assumption that at least 8% will be eligible. So we are assuming an 80% eligibility rate. This is now based on the previous campaigns. So this 80% is based on our experience, based on previous. And that youth project staff will take approximately a week shortlist the candidates. So this is an assumption. Then the number of shortlisted candidates will be 600 because we are assuming the 80% eligibility rate. So we'll have 600 here as our target. Then when we move to the next output for the sub-activity, so out of shortlisted.
Perhaps, sorry, apologies,
Yes.
Amelie. I
Yes.
think that, you know, before you move to the next one, some people are stuck. So I'm just looking at the chat, and I think that when, you know, one doesn't understand how you reach your the answer in your calculation, then it's, you know, people get stuck and they don't then follow the rest of the presentation. So Vuyo, you were working preparing a written response, but there was a question about the social media social media calculation. Molefe had written, I can't follow how you arrived at 2 times 3 times 3 for social media under assumptions. I only get 2 times 3. Where's the other 3 coming from? And then Sichle also had indicated that they were not following the social media calculation. And so if we could just answer that, please, and then we can move forward. And then there was a question from Ridwan Fakir, and he had questioned, his question was about what you have put in the assumptions. It read more like a description and not an actual assumption. So perhaps Vuyo, you can respond to the questions while Zameli prepares for the next input. Thank you.
Okay, I can start by answering.
Can you start, Zameli? Great stuff.
Yes. So the assumption for the adverts. So we're saying the advert will be placed twice in the Lowvelder, which is a local newspaper, once in the Sowetan and twice in the Citizen. So we get 5. Social media twice. So we've got 3 social media platforms there. We've got Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. So they will be they'll be posted twice a week. So that to represent the number of times they will be posted per week times 3. So we've got 3 social media platforms. I'm not sure if I am clear, if I can get an indication on that.
Yeah, I think that was clear.
All right. Then Vuyo, we want to take another one.
All right. So the other question from Ridwan was saying that the assumption reads more like a description of the activity. And the response that we wanted to give is that it's important for us to, under the assumption, to better understand how it is that we're going to roll out, as an example, the advertising of a particular activity. So the detailing of the platforms where we will be rolling out these adverts and the number of times is all useful in terms of understanding what we are assuming around the effectiveness of that sub-activity overall. So yes, it does relate to the sub-activity, but we have to understand what the finer detail around how we're going to roll out that activity is, in order for us to understand how you are interpreting it to be effective for that purpose.
Yes. Another thing, just to add on what we were saying, assumptions assist us when projects are not able to realize certain outputs because they would have assumed. So if the assumption is not holding, so it also assists. There's that, okay, they can explain that these assumptions did not hold, such that we did not, or we're not able to realize a certain output. Thanks.
Let's just see if there's any other question.
The questions have now been answered, Boya.
Okay,
Can I
thank you.
move on?
Proceed.
Thanks. Thank you. All right. So we are at sub-activity 1.4. So we have shortlisted the candidates. So out of the shortlisted candidates, so we will contact all those who are shortlisted and schedule for aptitude and technical skills testing, either online or at one of the youth project offices. So the test will assess what a person is capable of doing or to predict what a person is able to learn or do given the right education and instruction. So it will be twofold, verbal and non-verbal. So we will be assessing the non-verbal test ability to handle numerical data patterns and problem solving. So the output that will result from that sub activity will be the number of candidates that will be completing aptitude. Assessment. So that will be the output. So under the assumption that there will be a 5% drop out rate from the shortlisting and testing. So this is based on drop 5%. It is also assumed that the applicants will be able to complete testing online or in person. So this is an assumption. So if we are assuming the 5% drop rate, we will be now left with 570 applicants. Then moving on to the next sub-activity. So we want to describe an output for that. So based on the aptitude and skills assessment, candidates will be selected for different work streams within the ICT sector. So these are software developers, data analysts, web developers, and network administrators. So these are the roles that will be available in the sector. So an output associated with that will be the number of candidates selected to the program. So we are assuming that candidates they will pass the aptitude or meet the requirements of the aptitude and be enrolled into the program. So we are assuming that candidates that meet teach. Enrolled. So here we are saying we will be left with 500. So here it is anticipated that 88% of the 570, this 570, we are assuming that 88% is anticipated that 88% of the 570, which is 500. So we are assuming that 500 candidates will complete testing. Suitable for ICT roles. So we are assuming that 88% will be suitable to fit the roles. So we'll be left with now 500 candidates. Then the next activity or sub-activity will be the number of candidates to undergoing gamification. So here we are saying candidates that will undergo the gamification is the selected 500. So the output there will be the number of candidates undergoing gamification assessment. So the assumption there is all candidates will complete the gamification assessments. It will take a week to analyze, test, and allocate candidates to an appropriate blend of training. All right, so we are assuming here that all candidates will complete the gamification assessment. And it will take a week to analyze and allocate candidates to the appropriate blend of training. So this is still 500 candidates that have been selected. I'm not sure if we have questions before I proceed to the last two sub-activities. Or must I just
Zameli, there's a
proceed?
question. There's a question
Yes.
from Pumutsu. The question is, do we then assume that our project is based on us enrolling 500 youth? I would assume that the question relates to this particular example and not a
Yes.
specific application,
Yes.
but that is the question.
Yes. So this is for demonstration purposes only. So this is just to demonstrate on how to complete the PIMP. This is only the example. I'm sure the question has been answered. Let me then move to the next sub-activity. So candidates enrolled into the ICT Skills Development Program. These are business analysts, software architects, technicians, developers, and administrators. So here we will have to allocate those who completed the gamification. So we allocate them to different roles as specified here in the sub-activity. So the output there will be the number of candidates enrolled into the ICT Skills Development Program. So we are assuming that all selected candidates are enrolled and are ready to begin the training program in period 2. So the assumption is that all selected candidates are ready program, period 2 of the project implementation. So it's 500. So the final number here is 500. So the last sub-activity will be applicants that were not selected, because you will remember we had 750 applications received, and now we're ending up with 500. So what about the 250? So those who were not selected will be referred to other support services so they can be assisted there. So here the output of that will be the number of applicants referred to other support services, because you'll remember we have received 750, so we're only selecting 500. So the 250 will be referred where they can be assisted. So it is expected that this is an assumption. All those applicants who were not selected for the program be referred to other support services, and that number is 250. So when Vuyo was giving the presentation on defining the key concepts, he spoke about the overall milestone for output for activity category. So here the overall output for this activity category will be the number of candidates enrolled into the ICT skills development program. So this is the overall milestone. So the assumption there was that 88% of the selected candidates meet the aptitude requirements. So this is based on previous experience, based on previous plans. And another assumption is candidates will be ready to begin program in period 2 of the project. So the final number here is 500. So we have received 750 applications, 250 did not meet the eligibility criteria and assessment, they did not meet the assessment, then 500 were selected successfully to join or enrolled into the program. So this is how we describe and complete the outputs. We describe the assumptions and targeting in the ABC PIMP. So we have used the example that was circulated to the registered delegates. Before I move on to the next segment of my demonstration, I would like to pause and see if there are questions.
Zamile, there are questions that have not been responded to yet. One of them
Yes.
is saying, do you have, from Julius, do you have a minimum sub-activities per main activity?
No, we don't have a, yes, we don't have a minimum. You can have, but I think it's here we have about 8. You can have more depending on the project that you are applying. I mean, you will be implementing. So yeah, I don't think there's a minimum number of sub-activities you can have, because we need more information and more details as possible. But I think 8 sub-activities is sufficient for projects of this nature, but you can have more. That's the answer that I have, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And then the last one is from Molefi. I realized that in the assumptions, we have timelines such as then in court, it will take weeks to analyze and allocate candidates, close quote. What is the significance of this information, or is this still coming?
So the assumption, as I was saying earlier, so when we put assumptions, it assists us to understand what must happen before you can realize a certain output. So it is important that we describe those, because we need to understand what are the conditions that must exist for something to be realized.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what I can pick is not yet responded to. Let me just scroll again. Okay. There's another question.
There's a question. Does the jobs fund have a target regarding how many jobs need to be created by participants? Offensi has asked, does the jobs fund have a target regarding how many jobs need to be created by participants? The answer, Offensi, is no, we do not have a target. Each project application is unique, but in the number of jobs that you create, that is where the competition lies. So a competitive application, obviously, we look at the number of jobs, we look at the quality of those jobs, we look at the sustainability of those jobs. But coming back to what Zameli is explaining to you here, we're also looking at, of course, if many people, well, not many people, often people are inclined to exaggerate the number of jobs that they can create. We will look at this ABC PIMP document. We will look at the key activities that you've identified, and we will then draw conclusions about whether what you are saying in respect of the number of jobs you will create, whether that is actually plausible in relation to what your plan is. Thank you.
All right, I hope all the questions have been answered. Chair, can you indicate if I can move to the next?
Sorry, there's a question from Erica there, Xavier.
Okay, let me just check
timeframes. So Erica asks, timeframes, are they then within a quarter? Yes, Erica, for everything that you are planning, we want to see a quarter by quarter breakdown. You're not going to be doing the same thing every quarter. You're going to be, taking on different activities in a quarter, which is all going to be leading to a milestone. So the way in which you present the information is what activities are you going to be undertaking each quarter.
All right.
So she has a question there, and she says, are lead applicant organizations usually referred to as beneficiaries or participants? The lead applicant is referred to as our partner. Do we have a minimum number of main activities? No, we don't. I think that's all the questions. Zamili, please proceed.
Right. Thank you. So in the project example that was shared with the registered delegates, they would have noticed that there are program and project specific indicators in that skills development program in the ICT. So all the information is there. So we were provided with program specific indicators and program indicators and project specific indicators. So we're also given the targets associated with those indicators. We were touched on those. He explained what a target is and what a project specific indicator is. Then the means of verification, in the jobs fund, we've got a standard means of verification when it comes to job creation. So we are making use of employment contracts. So in the example, we were told that there will be 3 fixed-term positions that will be created. So these are now 18 to 24 months contract positions. So according to our program indicator protocols or our indicator definitions, so we have got about 8 program indicators. So for indicator 1, 1.1, and in this case, we have 1.2. Indicator 1.2 is the number of new fixed-term jobs created. These are jobs that, these are fixed-term contract positions of 12 months or more. So in the example that was provided, we are told that there will be 3 positions that will be created. So we will put 3 there. So these are people who will be working with the project, making sure that assessments are correctly done and all that. So the assumption here is 3 new employees. Yes, DDG?
I didn't have my hand up, Zamili, but there was a question about in the scenario where we are targeting to fund multiple SMEs and track jobs on those SMEs and also jobs further created by those companies funded by those SMEs, at what level do we reflect the numbers? And so my answer to that will simply be that you're going to, in your application, you're going to say you're going to support 500 SMEs. So that is the first number that you're going to track. Then you are going to say to us, and we anticipate that the SMEs that we are going to be supporting are going to be creating 1,000 jobs. Well, then you're going to have to track that 1,000 jobs that need to be created by those SMEs. So everything that you say you are going to achieve, you need to track that, and you need to track it at every level of indicator that you have said you would be delivering on. So I see there's a thumbs up, so I guess the question is then answered. There was a question about, and it doesn't really relate, well, it's indirect, but it says, give us guidance on what would be considered a competitive cost per job, formal jobs versus informal jobs. And the answer is not as straightforward as that. It really does depend on what you are going to be unlocking. And it doesn't matter about whether the job is in the formal sector or whether the job is in, it's an informal job that you're creating. We're looking for sustainability. We're looking for innovation. We are looking for value for money, and we are looking for social impact. And so within that, there are elements of building the institution's capability, and that might cost a little bit more and will then drive the cost per job. It also depends on the sector. I can say to you, though, that on average, the Jobs Fund has delivered jobs across its portfolio at 23,000, but that it really does depend on the sector. It depends on what you are trying to do, etc., etc. So we're not a mass employment program where we say to you, your conversion rate must be X and your cost must be Y. Because we are into and we want to deliver on sustainable job creation, we recognize that it might be different and that it will take more. So there is no one standard answer on that. And so the same, I hope, Manda, that I've also answered your question as about whether we have a benchmark of cost per job created in different categories. Okay, thank you. You please proceed, Zamili.
Yes. So I've just completed program indicator 1.2. So the example is saying there will be 3 newly created fixed-term positions. So this will take place during the first quarter or first period of project implementation. So we see there is 3. Then in the project example, there is indicator 2. number of permanent placements beyond project partners. So here, out of the trained or the enrolled candidates, after completion, we are assuming that others will be able to self-place themselves, meaning that they will seek and secure their own jobs. So we're given a number of 15 there. So the assumption is some of the participants will self-place. This means that they will be able to go out and look for jobs, but given the nature in the ICT sector, so most of the time these are contract positions. So it is anticipated that a third of the placements will be permanent positions, indicator 2 and 3. So these are fixed term permanent positions beyond project partners. So this is the assumptions that we have. So it is also assumed that trained participants will secure with these jobs within 3 to 9 months after completion of the training program. Let me just type in the assumptions. Right. All right, so we are assuming that a third of these will be placements. So meaning that these are number of permanent placements beyond project partners and also number of number of permanent placements with project partners. So because the example says the project will partner with employers. So here we were given 15. So we are spreading them. We are assuming that they will 5 will be employed in period 4 of project implementation. Then another 5 in period 5 and period 6. So which gives us a total of 15 as per the project example there. Then when we move next to another indicator 2.2, number of fixed term placements beyond project partners, we are also given 15 of those jobs will be created beyond project partners. So the assumption here is others, again, will be able to self-place themselves. Some will secure fixed-term contract positions, and we are assuming that they will be able to do that between 3 to 6 months after they have completed the training. So the assumption here, And also this will take place during 4th, 5th, and 6th period of implementation. So we are just trying to align the program indicators numbers that were given to the PIMP. So there is 15 for program indicator number 2.2. You will see that we've got standard means of verification. Then another indicator that we're given is indicator number 3, the number of placements with project partners. So we're given 136. So the assumption here is that most of the participants will be placed with employers that the project has signed offtake agreements with. So the assumption is most of the participants So we are assuming that 136 will be employed by, will be placed with project partners. So the project has signed placement agreements with employers. So we are assuming that those will be able to absorb the project participants. So it will take place, so they will be able to employ 30 in the 4th quarter, 56 in the 3rd quarter, 50. So this will give us now 136 that the project is contracted to deliver on for the duration of the project lifespan. So we also have indicator number 3.2, number of fixed term placements with project partners. So these are positions or contract positions of 12 or more months. So it's 233 if you look at the example. So we go down to 3.2. So the assumption there is most participants will be placed with employers that Advantage has the placement agreements with, again. So, and we are assuming that each placement partner will be able to place at least 16 employers will be able to absorb these. Yes. So most of the participants, this is an assumption, will be placed with employers that the project has signed place agreement with. And we are assuming an average of 16 place because of the number. So this will take place during 4th period of implementation. So here is 233. Then the last program indicator that is in the project example is the number of trained beneficiaries. So this is a skills development program. So main activity, the majority of activities is about training. So the example provides 475. So the assumption here is 95% of candidates will meet the training requirements of obtaining at least 75 in all coursework throughout the 9-month period and will successfully complete the training. So you will remember we have selected 500. So the assumption is 95% of those will meet the training requirements. At least so if we take 95% successful rate, so it means that we will have 475 trained beneficiaries after a year. I will pause there, Chair, and see if there are questions before I go to the last segment, completing the project-specific indicators as per the project example that we shared with the delegates.
I think all the questions have been responded to.
Chair.
Yeah, you may proceed.
Okay. So the last segment of completing the ABC PIMP, according to the example, so we're given project-specific indicators there, the number of candidates enrolled into the ICT program, those who completing the soft skills training, those who completing the ICT training and off-take agreements. So I will just go straight to the project-specific indicator and complete the assumptions. I will start with the means of verification, the assumptions, and targeting, as per the example that was shared with the delegates. So the first project-specific indicator will be the number of candidates enrolled into the program. So the means of verification there, because we don't have standard means of verification. So here we will be dependent on the applicants or the Jobs Fund partners to provide us with those. So in this case, the means of verification will be a list of enrolled candidates. We want to see a list of how many were enrolled into the program. So the assumption is 88% of the 570 are tested, meet the aptitude requirements. So we are left with 500. So we have seen the main milestone, it was 500. So here we have enrolled 500 during period 1. There is 500. Then we move to the next. So the project has partnered with employers. So when they partner with employers, the means of verification for that will be the signed employment agreements or the signed placement agreements. Signed employment agreements. Will be our means of verification. So the assumption is that given the current interest from the employers and the project partner pipeline, it is assumed that 23 employers will commit to employing an average of 16 participants. So we are assuming that the assumption that project has a healthy pipeline and 23 employers are committing to employ at least or an average of 16 participants. So we've got number of employers here that are committing to provide placement agreements. So it's 23 that will happen in period 2 of the project implementation. Another project specific indicator is the number of candidates are completing ICT training program. So the means of verification for that will be the completion certificates. So completion certificates will be our means of verification. And also we are assuming that 95% will complete the training. 95% will successfully complete the training. So this leaves us with 475. Then the last, no, not the last, not the last. So the number of those, so there are two. There's ICT training program and so the soft skills training program. So again here, the means of verification will be the completion certificates for this project specific indicator. So completion certificates will be our means of verification, and 5% is the assumption. We are assuming 5% dropout rate. Expected. So it's ICT training program and soft skills training program. Number of applicants referred to other support services. You'll remember that we received 750 applications. We enrolled 500, then the 250 were referred. So the means of verification for that will be the list of referred applicants to other support services. So it is expected that those who were not selected for the ICT program will be referred to external support services. services, and it is 250. Chair, this is all from my side in terms of completing the ABC PIMP, the results chain and program and project specific indicators, making use of the example that was shared with the registered delegates. I will open for the questions if there are any. Other than that, this is all from my side.
Thank you very much, Zamile, for the session, detailed session, step by step. I'm sure our partners followed and they picked where maybe the challenges they were preparing. They can see what needs to be done and so forth. I can see there are a lot of thumbs up, applause coming up. Thank you very much. I've just checked on the questions. There is all questions have been responded to. Thank you very much, Zamile. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move on to the next section, which covers the costing sections of the ABC PIMP, and Eve is going to lead in this section. Over to you, Eve. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you once again, Zamile, for taking us through that so patiently. And I'm so encouraged by the questions. We have had to adjust to a new way of doing things, and it's very encouraging to see the level of interaction, whether it's people getting lost or not. It's still good interaction. I'm going to switch off my video so that the bandwidth is enabled. And share my screen. Which should be coming any minute now. Great. You let me know if you can't see it, but I trust that it's visible. Okay, so I'll continue. Thank you once again. So we wanted to approach this on the working from the example as Zamile has taken us through that was worked through in the previous engagement on the PIMP. So we have used the same example, but we've also looked at a number of questions posed, themes around the questions, and also we tried to get some further interaction with potential applicants, and that is in getting them to write areas that they are potentially struggling with the PIMP, so that we could infuse it into the example and make it as practical as possible. So I do hope that you've had a chance.
Just 1 second, Eve.
Sure.
There is a request from Alvin to please zoom in. The font is too small.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry. Is that better? Thank you. Thank you, Xavier. Okay, I've taken it to 80. Can we work with that?
Up, so I think it's good.
Okay,
the thumbs
super.
up.
Thank you. Right, so we did have some questions. Some of them continue to be asked here. So we hope that when we are done with working on this, we'll get you, closer to understanding some things to be mindful of in terms of the ABC PIMP. It is, it is a reflection of cash basis of accounting. So my colleague always says that it's basically the bank account. So what we do see here in the costing section, except for the in-kind costs, which isn't necessarily cash based, is is wholly based on cash flows. However, in order to balance, and I'm sure you accountants would appreciate that, we do ask that the in-kind items are expensed also in the costing section. The costs, I think, as we also had a chance to discuss in the previous session, should be all inclusive of VAT, of everything, because what you ask for here, we assumed you've costed escalations, etc. You've considered contingencies, risks, etc. And so when we do contract, this will be the final approved number, or final approved grant. And I think we do have a clause in the grant agreement that says, if there are escalations, you will have to cover those aspects. Okay, so I'm going to just ask you to reflect on the project example around some of the costs we've left in. Like I said, it is based on what we did before, and some of them we have introduced based on, like I said, the issues that were brought to our attention to expatiate. So if we reflect on the project example, colleagues, we have pre-populated advertising and social media campaigns, and Zamile has worked through that a bit, and the costing also follows the assumptions around number, frequency, etc. I want to draw your attention to activity 1.2, which the output is the testing of it, well, the sub-activity is the testing of the application process, and one of the outputs from those activities, the number of applications received. I want to get from the, and you can type it. I'll just ask David to shout out some of the responses. What, in relation to what the example has told us and what this sub-activity is describing, what other costs could we possibly consider against this activity? David, please let me know if there are any takers.
Nothing yet so far.
So,
okay, there's cost of print media.
Okay, sure. And I mean, that is something that would have
salaries.
Okay, thanks. I'm noting those. So we've got print media and salaries. So print media, we could have accounted for in this line. So we could introduce another line, around print media. So what's in the example, and salaries will definitely get to. In the example, we talk about them developing this online application system. So something that I think would be critical to be costed, whether it's, and I'm going to assume here that I'm going to assume here that the system has been developed prior to the Jobs Fund involvement, and perhaps we are doing some tweaks in the project. So something that we need to be costing here, based on the example, would be that the platform development costs, and here we would. Here it would be classified. take it down slightly. Yes, it will be that will be classified as capital. And the sub classification, the level 2 score classification would be systems. And here, so let's assume that it is 5 million rand. The balance, you know, that pertains to this particular project is 5 million. Sorry, I think a 0 there. We pop that in, and this was also an area where our colleagues had, you know, lots of questions, and there seemed to be some confusion. So here it would be a direct cost, meaning that we will pay direct from the bank account. So if you remember, I've said that we should let's consider this part of the PIMP as the bank account. So we'll pay direct from the bank account to the service provider, or to the final recipient, which in this case would be would be a service provider. And if we go further on, we don't have cost, or we're not going to put in a cost estimation here, because the costs have been locked in as per the SLA. And here our assumptions is that, you know, we are just paying for the final module, some testing and handover costs. And we're saying that it's governed by the SLA with the service provider. And we can go further to say that, you know, we are going to pay it over 2 quarters. Right. Xavier, is there anything on this section?
There was also other cost, stationery,
Okay.
in the advertising. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, fantastic. So we have read the project example. So someone mentioned staff costs. So we do have that pre-populated, but what I would say here is that we should word it slightly different, because, you know, yes, when I go across, I can see what's happening, but it should probably be named staff salaries. Sorry, my fingers are also so frozen. So staff salaries for recruitment, I think that's a better description of the cost. And as the person correctly mentioned, we would have to account for it, because it looks like we're sifting through, is it 750 applications to try to get through to 500. And there would be a compensation cost. Here, it's compensation. We are compensating existing staff at the particular applicant, the entity that's conducting it. And again, this is going to be critical, because you are having to then nominate how we are paying the staff. And because they're existing staff, you've set up the payroll, et cetera, to come from a different bank account. So you are going to pay, and it's probably not 100% of their salary anyway. So say you're going to engage, I don't know, 10 staff members to do this work for 10% of their time, and that's the amount that this comes to. You're obviously going to pay them their full salary and do your deductions on your side through your payroll, and you reimburse or you claim for only 10% of the 10 people's cost from the project, and that's why we are calling it a reimbursement. So it's not going to be salary costs paid direct to the final beneficiaries, which are the staff members from the project bank account. It's going to be via the entity claiming, which is the corporate in this case. And there is some assumption around escalation. Okay, so we move on to, and someone also mentioned stationery. It is here in the pre-populated version, and it is in the example where it is said that stationery costs will be contributed on an in-kind basis. And if you recall, I said that we do have to cost the in-kind item so that we balance. And here, we've just asked that you please highlight where it is an in-kind cost, so we can kind of quickly separate and identify them. And there your classification would be under goods and services and stationery printing. And here it's going to be well, yeah, it's not critical because there's no actual movement from the bank account, but yeah, so I would say that one we don't actually need to nominate for in-kind costs. Then we move on then to activity.
Yes, there is a question, maybe I think it's important to deal with it now. Says, hello, Eve. Is there anything in particular to bear in mind when 3 NPO are partnering under one application where all 3 will be active participants in the implementation and all 3 will be appointing / contracting with beneficiaries and all 3 will be incurring costs within the consolidated budget?
Yeah. Okay. So thanks for that. As far as so let's go maybe back to first principles. When you're costing, we need a transparent and see-through way to be able to agree with you on how you've costed it. And so the one thing I would encourage, we can, whilst the PIMP that you have, you can't do much in editing to our sheets in terms of formatting and inserting lines. I do recommend that you give us your working documents. You can insert the sheets in the PIMP themselves so we can review. So we do need to have that see-through to how you've arrived at that cost. One thing I would and I mean would agree on the basis and whether we think that they're well balanced, that you're allocating the costs in the right places, we're carrying the jobs fund, you're asking the jobs fund to pay for the right things. When we get to, and then we must also agree here on the evidence that you are going to supply to us on a quarterly basis to show that, to enable us to verify those costs, right? I would say something to be also mindful of is the timing. So where we have these kinds of, many party participants, you have to kind of roll up the costs, and you have to work hard, I think, at aligning your processes, aligning your timing. So when it comes time to report, everyone has submitted what they need to report. You've agreed on the format so that the report comes in on time and we can then get to the business of assessing and disbursing on time. So that's what I would offer you at this stage. But it does sound complex. So I would recommend perhaps that you also write to us and we can have further interactions in that regard. Okay. I will move on then to activity 2, which is concerned with the training aspects. So, and I apologize, I know we do have some finance, or I saw some finance colleagues registered, and I see some, finance colleagues on the call. So this is very much a work seeker type of example, but we can please drop questions in the chat around, specific issues you're having around financing, lending, those kinds of projects. So when we move on to activity 2, which is the training aspect of it, so if we go to 2.2, there's we are told that there's an orientation session. It's a half a day. It may be virtual or physical. And I think the example also tells us that there's a transport stipend. There's a transport stipend related that they offer to the beneficiaries in training. So having said that, I'm noting that we are in training, we are talking about, there's stipends involved. you know, what could my next or my first costing around the training activity be? Any offers, Xavier?
Let me see. There is in-house staff costs.
Sure.
Okay, let me see what else. There is a facilitator.
Correct.
There is venue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those
Yeah.
there's catering.
Yep. Excellent. So all those would apply. I'm just going to zoom in on one of them, which is catering. Which is catering. And it relates to the orientation day. Here, okay, here we'll select goods and services. Sorry. Okay, so we'll select goods and services, and our sub activity there, or our sub classification will be conferencing venue, and there we'll say, let's say it's a 20,000, and there again we can definitely pay the caterer direct. There's no real reason or, well, I would imagine there's no serious hindrance to paying a caterer or catering company directly. We don't have inflation costs applicable because it's a once-off activity, and our assumption here again is that 80% will attend in person, and we are going to pay 50 Rand per person. We did say it's once a day, so that's only a once off here, and this is around the time I think when we are busy or we are done with enrollments, and that's it. So we move on then, and like I mentioned, the transport stipend. So I will focus on that, and here transport stipend for the orientation day. We're saying goods and services, and we sub-classify as transport, and there it's 40,000. Again, it should be a direct cost. You will just have to tell us if you're paying it you know, via e-wallets or vouchers and so on or if you're actually organizing a transport service. Again, we have no escalation because it's once off, and there we are saying it's 100 Rand per candidate per day. And in terms of timing, again, it's cash, so we have to reflect when we expect it to leave the account, not when we raise it, not when we receive the invoice, etc., when we expect to pay it, and this is again in, let's say, in this period. There's an in-kind cost item here which relates to training, which was already populated, and this is the trainers and the industrial psychologist, and those are classified as training, and yeah, there are costs and things associated. There was a question around reflecting the in-kind that Nazim responded to. And I mean, we always say we want to see the full costs of the activity. So even if it's in kind, you know, once we've agreed and the basis of valuation is reasonable, please reflect it. But I think Ben also mentioned in the previous one, we don't necessarily want to see, you know, in-kind costs for the sake of in-kind costs. It just unnecessarily inflates the budget. Yeah, so so this is how you would reflect it, and I suppose in deciding what to bring in, you know, let's stick to the ones that actually do impact or have a bearing on the implementation and the outcomes of the project. Xavier, is there anything for me?
Okay. Yes, there were also things made like training manuals.
Okay.
Then there was almost like a question, training material, e.g. computer hire or acquisition. I think they already clarity on there. Then the other one was, would new training staff, e.g. lecturers, mentors, coaches, education, who are 100% dedicated, education managers, sorry, that are 100% dedicated to the project, be classified under goods and services, stroke training, or under compensation, stroke new staff?
Okay, so let me start with the first one. Training material, yes, you can and you should cost for it. There was an activity here, I just skipped it, around curriculum development, and I mean, you know, depending on how you've described your activities, you could cost for training material, the tools you require. Sure, there should be a substantial, well, depending on the service you're offering the young people, substantial computer or systems costs associated. You may, the online platform in this case doesn't need data, but you may be issuing participants with data and all that. So all that you should cost for. And then staff dedicated to the project. So that's a great question. And I'm going to illustrate it in my next line. So the answer is yes, but only as it relates to them training, to the activity of training. Where they are not training, then you classify them as compensation. So if you look at the example, we mentioned that 2 of the staff members are existing staff that will be instrumental in the training activities. They'll be maybe facilitating, doing assessments, and so on. So I'm going to now illustrate how we split up their time or how we split up their cost to reflect the activity that they are doing. Okay, so we go to activity 2.4. I'm just going to copy it and paste it. Yeah. Okay, so we have training staff costs, and here I'm referring to I'm trying to cater for those two staff members, right? So ideally, because they are salaries, they should be reflected as compensation. But if I do that, it's going to not give me the correct picture of what's happening. And also you can see once we select compensation, we don't have training sub options. So, and what it might then do is, well, give us the wrong information or impression of the project, that the project is compensation heavy. Yes, it may be, but it is an activity-based costed PIMP. So we want to cost the activity as opposed to, say, the role of the person. Of course, it must be done to in pragmatic terms. When you have many staff members doing 50 different things, then it becomes, impractical to do that. And perhaps you just want to then say, we are going to claw back 10% of the project or 7% of the project cost, and we'll cover all these things. We must just have the conversation, and like I said, let's just be mindful of practicalities, both in terms of you completing that and us monitoring it. So like I said, because I have limitations in if I were to choose the compensation line, I'm going to move it to goods and services so that I have the training option available to me. And here we had done a calculation before. So that's going to cost about, yeah, that much. And it is a reimbursement again, because it is a payroll, but it's just, so this is a bit of a misnomer where we are calling it a good and service, right? A good. And here we are using the escalation of 3%. And we are saying these 2 staff members, they are going to be doing, dedicating 100% of their time to training. They cost this much, and we only do that, we only cost them in the period where the training is at 100%, in the period where the training is being undertaken. I think the candidates graduate here. It's true, these same staff members may be doing other things in this period and in that period, and will account for that shortly. But for training, where we're saying they're dedicating 100% of their time in training or training activities, this is how we have gotten to the number and to the allocation. Then we also, again, back to the stipend story, we are saying that they, and I mean, these are just specific costs I'm highlighting. We are saying that there is a stipend available to the candidates, and they will classify again as transport, goods and services. And I think there we said it's 150,000. Direct cost again, and we won't, yeah, so it's 3 days. I think so we said the soft skill training here is 3 days as opposed to the in addition rather to the induction training. And again, that is how we are delivering it. And the soft skill training also comes in at the end of the period when they're about to be placed at the partners, etc. So that's how we will place it. So maybe let me do the other part of these same 2 staff members. No, I won't do that. Let me deal with training costs. So again, there's the actual training, which is in the programs listed here, and there it was pre-populated for you. Again, listed under training here, and direct cost, and it's based on 10,000 per person. I think we've assumed that all 500 will pay. So whether they drop out or not, there is a cost associated with it, unfortunately, and that's rolled out in the period that we expect to pay. I want to pause here just to hear if there are any follow-ups or questions before I go into.
I think all questions have been addressed by the team. I see Ben, Terence, Nazim have been frantic responding. I'm not sure if there's one that I've missed. Yeah, I think they've all been responded to.
Awesome. Thank you. Sorry, I'm in a room with a grumpy machine, so you'll hear odd white noise here and there. Okay, so I wanted to keep it all within this activity too. It's not necessarily the best place to have it. There may be an activity called project administration and support, etc. And this is where I would place some of these costs. As you can see, I'm placing them here just for illustrative purposes. There's no activity per se associated with it, but in your in finalizing your PIMPs, in finalizing your PIMPs, you will deal with you'll deal with, and it will be nice to place it in an area, in one specific activity. We have space where we look at, let's call it administrative issues. Yeah, so the first item is to reflect, recruitment costs. So we did mention that I think additional 3 employees, sorry. And I remember, I think there was a question where there was around whether if your new employees can be counted as new jobs created. And I think in Zamile's example, he showed that that was reflected as an indicator 1.3. So those 3 staff members are coming through, the new staff members, they're coming through this recruitment process. There is a cost associated with it. And yeah, you know, we try to cater for many things, but where it doesn't fit neatly, you can select the all other. And we are saying it's going to be 50,000. Again, a direct cost, maybe to a recruiter. No, sorry, I do have specific assumptions around this. And we're saying we'll pay LinkedIn, you know, 10,000 per week or something like that, or yeah. And again, it's a very specific time that we are doing it. So once off, sitting in that quarter. The next cost I want to look at is the salary for these 3 new staff members. And here there will be, because, well, we are assuming that they will be dealing with coordination, administration, etc. So unlike these staff members that we are classifying as training, here we're classifying them as pure compensation costs, or we could call it project admin costs. And it's new staff. And here I think we said it's 1.9 million over the period. Yeah. And here, you know, you can tell us if it's something that if you can then, you know, pay them because they're new staff directly from the project, or, you know, you just load all your process, all your payroll still from your current bank account and claim a reimbursement. Again, here, I'm sure you also the news, the public servants you're looking at a 3%. Yeah, so we would look at this also to say, okay, what's reasonable, what's realistic? Let's look at that. And the assumptions, again, 3 staff engaged per the example, 18 to 24 month basis at 30,000 per staff per month. And yeah, we have modeled that. We've also shown that 3% escalation over the 24-month basis. It means that we do have because we bring them in right at the beginning, we might have a gap here, but the project will see how to finish that. And then we go back to these 2 staff members. So recall we said that some of their time is engaged in training, but some of it in the parts where there's no training activities will be in the project coordination, support, etc. So here we will classify them or their costs under compensation, and they are existing staff. And I think we're saying this is the total amount that they'll cost the project as far as well. So again, another option would be to use the project administration subclassification, but I'll keep it at compensation for now. And again, a reimbursement, the existing staff. So here we are saying, you know, it's those 2 staff members engaged on a 50% basis in the preparation phases and post-training phases. So again, here I have accounted for them pre-training. If you can picture what it looks like above. They are training in these periods at 100%, and then we come back to 50% post-training, and again, having applied the 3% escalation to the end. So, colleagues, that's how you would reflect allocations where people are straddling roles and activities. Yeah, I hope that's clear. And then something that also came up a bit in the last training session, building operating costs. And here, yes, you know, the project or the entity pre-existed. In fact, we want you to pre-exist before the jobs fund. And they have some fixed costs or running costs associated with running their business. However, in doing this program, it also imposes costs, or there are some shared costs that they are going to be carrying. In this case, I'm just going to look at building operating costs to be classified under goods and services, and we do actually have a specific subclassification there under building operating cost. I think we said this is the amount, and here again, because the entity pre-existed, this is electricity, water, lights, rental, etc., things like that. Oh, so let's say maybe it's something to be reimbursed. We are building in a 6% escalation, and here they're telling us that they'll allocate 15% of their running costs of the business and entirety to the project. And yeah, I think that's what it amounts to, and that's over the life of the project, building in the escalation. Right. So, and I think those were the elements that I wanted to illustrate as far as this section is concerned. Is there any further questions or any requirement for clarification?
Yes, if there's one question that is keep on coming, which says, how do you differentiate between direct payment from reimbursement costs?
Okay.
It was responded to, but it came again, so maybe just need an explanation.
Okay, so direct costs are costs, I mean, in the simplest form, costs that you will pay to the final beneficiary or the beneficiary that's invoicing you, let's say, from the project bank account. Indirect costs are costs where it's maybe part of a suite of a broader service. So for example, payroll. You're going to run your payroll from your existing corporate bank account. It's possible, but you know, it's unlikely that you will then switch your payroll for your existing staff to this new bank account. So in that case, we say you can continue to run your payroll in your from your existing project bank, existing corporate account. However, for the staff that's working on this project, if it costs you 20,000 a month, you can go and fetch the 20,000 from the project bank account and then pay yourself, because you pay Eve per your normal payroll from the existing corporate bank account. However, the project is now, your corporate account needs to be topped up with that 20,000 Rand for Eve, and you go and get it from the project bank account. But it needs to be specified here that you're going to do that, so that we can process approval and that we can assess it. Not everything is going to be agreed to, because then otherwise it negates having the project bank account. But we understand that, you know, some things are just, you know, they can be tricky to move on to cost, to pay out of the project bank account. Okay, so if you look at the example, sorry, everything new-ish cost or things that can be invoiced in modules, or they are being paid directly from the project bank account. We are generally looking at costs that predated the jobs fund, where, you know, there's a system in place, so it's compensation. And here we are looking at building costs, where you're paying your telecom from that account, you're paying, you know, your city of Joburg or wherever from that account. So continue, but on a quarterly basis or on a monthly basis, you're going to say, hey, project, I need to get 100,000 back because this is what I paid on behalf of the project. Yeah.
Okay. There's one last question here from Olefi. Just to confirm, direct costs have nothing to do with costs related to the project, but on whether is paid direct from the bank.
The second part is 100%, but the first part of the question, no, because everything here has to do with the project. If it doesn't have to do with the project, we don't want to see it. So if, for example, so everything here has to do with the project. It just means that you're paying it from the project bank account. But if in this case, in this particular project example, there's a, you know, a minister, an MEC visit, you know, to the entity, that doesn't have really to do with the project, and we don't want to see it. It's just going to inflate the project cost unnecessarily. But this whole exercise, the PIMP, is to do with project cost. But your second part is 100% correct.
Okay, there is only one question from Noel, but Nazim is responding to that, so that's okay.
Okay. So at this stage, I wonder if we, and I know I'm perhaps, am I going? Yeah, actually, we are now into our lunchtime, right? So I wanted to check if we can break here and come back to deal with the financing plan, funding allocation, and SCOA. I think we were scheduled to come back at 12:50 anyway. 12:40. PD?
Okay, thanks very much. Yes, we may now break for lunch, 30 minutes lunch. So it's now 12:20. So we'll resume at 12:50. We take a lunch break, 30 minutes, and then we'll see you at 12:50, where we'll continue with Eve covering the remaining sections under the finance aspects of the ABC PIMP. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, welcome everyone. Now 12:50. Let's see some thumbs up to show that we are back. See thousands of thumbs up, although we are hundreds. See thousands of thumbs up. Let's get those thumbs up to confirm we are back. Okay. Thank you very much, colleagues, for joining, for rejoining. We now proceed with the finance section of the ABC PIMP, and back to you, Eve, to continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome back. Yes, I hope it was a refreshing break. It has been a morning of a lot of information. All right, so we continue. I see there was a lot of, and thank you so much to my colleagues, Ben, Nazim, Terrence, who are assisting on the responses with regards to allocations and classifications, etc. I hope that you are empowered, colleagues, in completing your PIMP. So I just want to draw your attention to the salaries tab. The salaries tab is a template that we put together. We encourage you to complete it. I think Terrence alluded to something similar. There was a question around allocation of CFO's time and whether it's project monitoring or project management, etc. So this is the template we've put together. If you have something that gives us an equivalent amount of transparency and see-through, you are welcome to insert it. You need not use it, but we'll absolutely need that information, and not just relating to salaries. For all your costs, you need to show us workings. We will ask you for evidence for pro formas, for financials, in some cases, to back up the costs that you're placing. And yes, I see also there have been a number of questions. We do encourage you to use the best estimate. We're not going to penalize you if it's an estimate, but we are all going to have a discussion about reasonability, or we'll look at the reasonability of it. So just wanted to bring your attention to that. And then just, whilst I'm here, when you get so you're going to upload the PIMP and, put your best effort in and with your best estimates, etc. We will then start to engage you on elements of the PIMP in this review tab, where, if you can see the layout, we've set it out according to general issues, and then based on the activity categories as outlined in your PIMP, we will issue comments to you based on what we've seen. We may say to you, clarify here, change this, or in some cases, we may even change it on your behalf. So when you receive it from your appraiser, please just have a look at this tab, and you will then have to respond to us to say, and then give us also make it clear. We have had PIMs where it's just come back to say done. Maybe we issue a request to change something. The applicant says done, and there's no way to trace what they've done. So don't be too cryptic here. As I was getting to the salaries tab, I thought that I should touch on that. So I'm going to go to the financing plan. So maybe before I go there, I just want to discuss some other elements of the costing side. So in the example, there were some additional financial considerations placed therein, and I want to also use it to illustrate or to respond to some of the questions that are being asked in the chat. One being, and it relates to Julia's Makova's question around costs that we include in the project. So in the example, it said the applicant had spent $1 million on the pre-establishment aspects of the buildings, including architects, planners, etc. So that we would consider a pre-project cost or pre-approval cost, and it should not be included in the PIMP. So to respond to your question, Julius, you're correct. We ask you to only include costs that can reasonably be expected to be spent or incurred after jobs fund approval. Where it was incurred before or spent before, you cannot claim it back from the project. So our kind of effective date is project approval. And I'm sure we'll hear more, or you will interact more about when that's expected to be. We've spoken about the reimbursements and so on, and then I'll come to the surplus later. So that then takes me to the financing plan. You can see we have built some checks in it. It's telling us that there's a problem here. So, but the finance, if we conceptualize the cost part to be that, the outflows, the financing plan relates to or captures the inflows from the jobs fund, you know, at the frequency and quantum that you require the grant, but that's obviously in relation to the match funding at the frequency and quantum, whether it's own funding or other sources. And I think these were discussed also in the last session, and the PIMP also you know, gives us, the project example also gives us an idea of, you know, how these are set out. So we don't have loan funding applicable to this project. If it was, then, you know, that you'd also depict here how those drawdowns plan to be coming in. Right. So that's on the match funding side. Then we said in kind, so isn't it, we've expensed it on the cost side. We need to bring it in on the income side. And yeah, in this case, there's a industrial psychologist whose services are being offered basically for free to the project, but we do cost it. We see that it does carry a 700,000 rand cost. We include it as an inflow. On the cost side, we will expense it exactly as it comes in, so the effect will be null. But it's just, it gives us information about who's contributing what and what, you know, the all-in costs of the project are. And similarly, stationery, again, coming into the project to the value of 300,000. There was a question earlier about sponsorships. You can, you know, document that here. We are yeah, the basis of the valuation, etc., and so on. As you can see, we have limited lines. So, you know, where, you know, it's many, we probably then need to summarize. But that's how you are going to depict the in-kind contribution where it is applicable. Then we also cater for secondary inflows. Yeah, this will relate to, well, I saw that there was an agriculture projects that are expecting to generate income. It's true, it does happen, although it's more and more rare, where some of the support for work seekers projects generate placement fees. But where that is the case, we would want to see that quantified and scheduled, and also brought back into the project, because it is project inflows as a result of the grant and match funding. So we would want it to come back into the project and be used for purposes of the project, well, you know, to expand the scope or replicate, etc. We'd want to see. And then where projects are, for the projects in the finance In the finance field, these would be repayments as a result of the loans that you have issued. Again, here you know would ask you for an a loan book amortization to give us an idea of how you've calculated your expected write-off rates, etc., and you document that. So obviously, in some cases, when those repayments come in, we might say to you, can you please reissue them out? We call them recycling. And then, so all the loan issuances, recycling of loans, you'll document in the costing section because it's an outflow. And where you're receiving repayments, interest as a result of those loans, you'll document in the inflow section. And similarly, where you are paying a funder, say interest, you will document it also in the cost section as an outflow. And then there's allowance made for other things. Sometimes we see things like that, and I know people say it's often hard to target the timing, and we say, well, yeah, you don't. We will check that there are, because some of the expense items are, there will be VAT inflow. So we will check that on a quarterly basis. So, but to the best of your ability where you can estimate, do. What then this might do on this side, the secondary inflows, is then create some kind of a buffer. And in the discussion with us, we will have a conversation about how, yes, the ability of the project to absorb the cash, I'm going to call them buffers, but they're probably not the right, it's not the right term, but the ability of the project to absorb this cash in the 2-year period. In some cases, projects may say, well, we will, we'll do the issuances of the first loans maybe in the first year. In the second year, we'll start to mop up the kind of additional cash, which is fine. But we will query, and we will push back where you are carrying, or the project is carrying, quite high amounts in terms of let's call it excess cash. Because then it starts to tell us that perhaps the grant you're requesting is too high, because we would have triggered the realization of this cash, which can then continue to support the project. Okay, yeah, so okay, on this, the checks that are being kicked out, it's basically checking if the expenses, if you have enough funds in your project bank account to carry the expenses that you've nominated here, and it's telling us no. So this means that either here or here, you will have to increase the income, because as it is, we are not able to carry the expenditure. And like we said, it's a cash basis. So yes, in finance, yes, you can potentially have this scenario, but for this PIMP, we won't accept this. So you will then need to fix it, obviously. Then I go to the funding allocation. So this section, and I call it yeah, it's good for us to know how you have thought about who should carry what risk, who should cover what costs, right? So as you can see, all these entries are pulled in from places in the PIMP itself. You don't need to do anything here. In fact, you don't need to do anything, in the top part of this document, where we want you to, or what we want you to complete is the comments and how you sought to allocate the funding across funders. And if we look at how we treated the training, we are able to put X amount into training which also assists the project to manage their 20% kind of current costs that are being carried by the project. Yeah, but we also see that, you know, training is a big aspect, or is a big contributor to the project cost and implementation. And here you make a proposal to us. We will assess it based on your project information, the research, the benchmarks, etc., etc. There are some costs, and this is just for illustrative purposes, where we'll agree to carry, you know, we agree that it's directly as a result of the project, we'll carry them 50-50. Generally, the staff on your payroll, please do, you know, carry them where you can. They're on your payroll. You have, you know, engaged them on a, you know, based on some expectation that you can carry the cost. So do so. Training, and here, or in general, for any of the costs, we look at where there is a funding gap, whether it's in your finances as the applicant, or in other funding available from the market or from the government. And we assess, you know, on those bases, we have kind of guidelines and protocols around what we are looking at, and to say, okay, and I mean, I don't think we'll ever say, oh, we want to carry 39%, but we'll say, okay, we want to participate perhaps in the training. I think in this round, we're not very keen on capital, or on carrying capital cost. And if we do, we tend to limit it. But those will be the kinds of considerations that we will look at, and we'll obviously have the discussion with you about how we think we should change the allocation, or whether we are accepting the allocation. But this is just for illustrative purposes. Are there any questions?
All the questions has been responded to by the colleagues as far as I can see.
Okay, wonderful. Great.
Oh, there is one just came in now.
Mm-hmm.
Does the 20% cap to the project and admin fee include the compensation costs categories?
Yes, we'll look at that. And so that's why we say, as much as possible, allocate where it is staff and they are doing, you know, other things, where it's, you know, where it's best to allocate them in other activities, do so. But it is included in the 20%. And I mean, the rationale there is, we do want to see some skin in the game and some element of risk taking. So we don't want necessarily, or let me not say we don't want, we want to avoid the behavior where applicants kind of bring in their current costs and they say, well, this is the project, this is what we're doing for the project, but you were doing it before the jobs fund. So what aspect of the jobs fund grant, or even your funding, is additional? And that's really what we are trying to do by limiting it. We have had, and it came from, I suppose, instances where we had projects coming in, you know, brought their payroll, brought their entire rental, everything, and said, yeah, this is match funding. So in essence, you know, that's not really match funding, because you were, you know, doing it. So that's what we're trying to avoid. But yes, the staff cost would be considered the compensation cost would be considered as part of the 20% cap. But you do have flexibility to allocate them elsewhere where it makes sense. Okay, so and then just some additional things too. So this is a reflection of the balance at the end of the period. And so whilst we have quarterly deficits, it says that it's telling us that overall the project is expected to, and it's not quite congruent with the example, but it's expected to not spend 3.2 million of the project income, which is the grant and match funding. And I mean, this is a project cost of 17 million or 20 million, let's call it. So if the surplus is this high, we are going to maybe have the conversation about whether we shouldn't then reduce the grant request and or the match funding request. And we do understand that, things happen. And so we might allow for some surplus here. But in these quanta, we are going to now have a discussion about whether the grant funding, as you've requested it, is the optimal amount, as we call it. Yeah, and just some resources to help you. We have tried to define the classifications and the sub-classifications. And then I'll come to the final tab that I want to speak to, which is the auto, and it's really just a summary, or it's the output of everything we've put in.
If just one
yes.
question, I think there is a follow-up question. There was a question which was responded to. The question was, I think this was about the on lending. Let me just go back to that question. Sorry. Are the loan repayments from the Jobs Fund, or they could be from other financing activities which the applicant has outside this project? And can these financing activities be utilized to match the Jobs Fund grants? So Ben did respond to that, and then there was a follow-up question to that to say yes, but does it matter where the finance come from to the fund? Maybe Ben would want to elaborate on that one, maybe to give the full context of what he had responded, since there is a follow-up question on that.
Thank you, PD. Ben?
Thank you, PD. Thank you, Eve. And thank you for the question. So yes, it matters because we would want to see what are the underlying terms on the loans that you are bringing in to the project, i.e., what is the interest rate, what is the repayment period, etc. Because for the SMEs to be able to repay these loans, it has to be above the terms that you are, or at a minimum, above or equal to the terms at which you are getting the funds at. So if you're getting the funds at, say, 5%, you would have to charge the SMEs more than 5% for you to recover that to repay. And also timing is of essence as well, as to when does the provider of those funds want their money. It might even kill the model depending on where you are in the sector you're operating in. That would be my answer to that. And Eve, if you want to add.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think Ben, you covered it. We would look at the documents to ensure that there is alignment. So whilst we look at sustainability, it's also, we want to check that the margins, for example, are reasonable and they're feasible, and the covenants, so that we also have an appreciation for the risk that's possibly associated with the funding. Yeah, and then you mentioned if you can use the loans. The second part, I think I assume Ben responded. I can't see the chat. You can use that loan to blend with the Jobs Fund grant, but we'd expect a kind of softening of the interest rates by virtue of the grant being mixed with the loan funding, etc., and those benefits to be passed on to the beneficiaries. Yeah. Okay. So the auto tab, it's a culmination of everything that's happened or that we've put in before. Again, and I think it's probably where it starts to be clear what we are doing or what you've been doing in terms of this PIMP. We start, of course, with the income section. And whilst we do have an in-kind line, the MF ratio is only considering the cash items. So, and it's the same for when you're considered for eligibility. It's also the same for when the grant is going to be drawn down. So, you know, if you've put, for example, all your in-kind funding, if you say you did it in Q1, we are still not going to move this grant until you put cash into the project of 1.25 million. So it's really just the cash match funding that's going to trigger the payment of the grant. So whilst we say this is a good to have, we want to see it, but the magic happens here at this interaction, right? And then we go into the expenditure. In this particular one, you can see it's pulled in based on the sub-qualifications, the salaries for the existing and staff, and training, etc., etc. So all these things are laid out there. And then this is also an important thing that, you know, I mean, yeah, I think that it probably goes without saying the finance people would be looking at, including the applicants that are completing. It relates to the issue I raised around the financing plan, but here it becomes a lot clearer as to the kinds of surpluses or deficits or surpluses you're running in the project. In this case, obviously, and I've left it like this on purpose, there are some adjustments that need to be made. And like I said, we need to pop in some more money, at least this much, which grows to that much. And from the grant or match funding in the project, we'll see how to structure it, pull in match funding earlier if that's the case. But if this were to be on the positive side and just growing without use, then we'll definitely have a we might have an issue there, because it means that perhaps we are overfunding the project, and we'd rather take a portion of that funding to maybe a different project. And not to say we are saying no, but if you're say running with a 3.2 million surplus, we can't really justify it. We'll say, okay, perhaps let's leave 1 million in the project, 500,000 odd, and the rest we'll take and reallocate to another project. But obviously that conversation happens at the appraisal phase. We don't do it unanimously. Yeah, so it's just something to be mindful of. But it's also not to say, and I'm sorry to say this, I hope I'm not offending folk, where, you know, we know that like real life happens, and while sometimes you get budgets that are just perfectly rounded, zero, you know, and that never happens. So we are not asking to promise impossible things, but, you know, levels of reasonability to be applied, right? Then this all relates to the entries that Zamile was doing around the specific indicators. And then we come, and these are all, yeah, summaries. It's now taking also from the SCOA, this line where it's just also, yeah, it's just giving us some indication on what's happening over the life of the project. Something I maybe just want to draw your attention to here is, I mean, and it's the nature of the project. There's training, I think, for a year, and then the jobs start to materialize. So it means that the jobs fund gets to go in a good kind of 55% before we start to see, you know, the results of the project. And we might agree to do this here, but if it doesn't materialize quite, and I mean, this is, I think it's a good amount of time, a good amount of grace. But if we start to get issues around this period 4, we might say, though we have contracted it as such, we might start to pull back on the grant. So you start to increase the performance around the jobs. And whilst it might seem counterintuitive, because we might be told, oh, we need the grant to create the jobs, it's about us limiting our exposure and our risk. But only in circumstances where it looks like it's not likely to happen will we start to talk about a different disbursement kind of regime. For those that know, we call it output basis, where we may then attach the grant we are going to pay to the actual jobs created. Because I think you all appreciate, if this doesn't materialize, we are 55% in, and we then need to start pulling back some of the risk. I think that's it. I'll grant you guys some extra time. Otherwise, we can discuss issues. I just wanted to check if I've dealt with the questions that I wanted to deal with that came through in the during training or otherwise. I think so. So yeah, I will give it back to you, PD.
Okay, thank you. There is a question that has just come, but what I've noticed is once you have responded, members then come back and say, please answer that question, because they're not seeing a response. So maybe you can can respond, but then one of our colleagues will still respond to it since we are closing. So It says, so is it correct that surplus funds should ideally be nominal or zero in the funding allocation tab? If you can respond, but our colleagues will also type it in for the benefit of other members. Thank you.
Okay, so the funding allocation tab is actually drawing the surplus amount from here. Well, yeah. So if you see, the amounts are identical, 3266. Yep. So I mean, well, it's a check rather on what's happening in the SCOA. So yes, it should be, I would say, also nominal, depending on the type of project. If it's a support for work seeker, I would think so. The project starts and ends, and so what kind of things would the surplus funds be used for? Maybe, post the 2 years, for 6 months, there are odds and ends that need to happen. We can consider that. But if it's, a huge amount, it's something that we might push back on. However, I need to say, in the case of on-lending projects, and in the case where, so for example, there's an agriculture project where they are actually selling goods, and so that additional income is coming in, the conversation will definitely be take on a different vantage, or will be taken from a different vantage point, because those projects are in the business of generating cash or generating kind of profit. So we will then have a discussion about, and I mean, this comes to now the structuring discussion, where it looks like the project can stand, and whether the surplus funds in the quantum that they are still appropriate for the project. But I would say for support for work seekers, definitely it should be nominal.
Thank you. There is another question which you, if you may respond, and then we'll also have our colleagues respond for the record. It says, if we don't get paid placement fees for support for work seekers project, is that a problem?
No, not at all. In the past, there were, in the good old days, it seemed, the employers were wanting, or were willing or able to pay these amounts. We have seen that come down quite a bit, almost to nil. So no, we don't expect you to show it if it's not, if it's not a reflection of your reality.
Okay, then the last question. Again, I will respond. It says, what is the required split between jobs fund and matched funding for non-profits? I assume that means for NGOs, non-profit organization. If that is the case, just to note that the match funding ratio is 1:0.5. So for every rand that the jobs fund will put, the NGOs we have to put 50 cents. Thank you. I hope that is the question that is being said was for non-profits. I assumed that's what they mean. Thank you.
Yeah. And then maybe just also just to as we close, just to cast your attention to this notification. This is for illustrative purposes, but I think this section still appears, actually does still appear in the PIMPs for the applicants. So if you have proposed a ratio of 1:1, then we don't expect you to go below that at any point in time during the implementation period. You can definitely exceed it, but we would then ask you, over and above correcting this, that you correct these aspects also. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing PD if that's what all we have for now. Thank you very much for your questions, for the interaction, and all the best once again with your applications.
Thank you very much, Eve, for that session. And once again, thanks for the participants, for the questions that have been coming through. We now move, correct me if when you are done on your section completely, just
yes, sir.
Yes, it's okay. So we now move to the next, to Hilton. Hilton is now going to cover the next steps on the post implementation and training. Thank you.
Thank you, PD. Yeah, my name is Hilton Sarakunda. I'm one of the team members of the JOS Fund, and I've been around the JF for quite a while. Yeah, as was with the rule, for bandwidth and other purposes, I'll switch off my camera, but I want to say thank you very much for being with us this far. I know it's been long and a lot of engagement. That's really appreciated. So I'm going to touch on, where from here now, right? So we've done training of the ABC PIMP. We know that it's a very detailed document, and this is not the end of it. It's just to equip you to be able to fill it with confidence. It's a lot more meat and direction of it, but there'll be a lot more engagement on it. The first thing really is the closing date. That date is cast in stone, right? And the timeline is exactly 3 p.m. As you know, we open for applications and we close on the deadline date. Once we close at 3 p.m., that's it. Whoever is in the game at that time is in the game. If you're not in the game at that time, you're not in the game. In the past windows, we have had a lot of applicants coming at 3:20 and say, but I'm just about to hit the submit button, but I can't anymore. But unfortunately, we all work on deadlines, and the time period is 3 p.m. by 17th of July. We are closing. So make sure that you complete your application. And my advice is that submit, before the date. And if you do on the date, do so long before the cutoff timeline of 3 p.m. All applications must include the ABC PIMP. I mean, it's really is the holy grail of our implementation. And all the due diligence documentation, including your FICA and legal assessments, all documents under the uploads and have the asterisks of compulsory must be uploaded. If you have not uploaded those documents, you won't be able to proceed to submit. So make sure you have all the documents and you have uploaded them before you hit the submit button. The painful thing would be to find yourself, with one compulsory document outstanding, and it's 10 minutes to 3, and you don't have that document, and it has to be delivered from somewhere, and wherever it's going to be delivered is going to take time. So do your uploads as you do the application, and there's a validate tab on the application. Continuously validate and see what is still outstanding before you submit. So once that is done, all the applicants that will be eligible would be communicated to. Those that will also not be eligible would also be communicated to. Those that make it past the eligibility testing would be informed of the dates that we are now going to do the due diligence engagements. Some of these engagements would be virtual, depending on the risk assessment of the projects. Some of them would be physical. So an appraiser would be allocated to your project. You do the appraisal of the project end to end. Basically, he or she is your key point of entry of all communication with the jobs fund. I do know that as teams do the due diligence, I mean, there may be more than just one person that you may communicate with, but make sure that your entry point always on communication is your appraiser, so that you don't miss certain lines of communication and certain assessments that may fall through the cracks. Please respond to all queries timelessly. Those who have worked with us know that the communication during due diligence is a very iterative process, and as teams are assessing your application, they may pick things that they may need responses to, and when they respond and ask for you to respond by a certain time, please don't be despondent. Respond during that time and ensure that your assessment is looked at in its completeness. When you submit late, you may not give the team enough time to do the assessment before they submit the assessment or recommendation to the next stage. Please note that contracting will only take place after the approval of stage 2 by the investment committee. As you know, we're going through first stage and second stage. Only after the last approval, which is stage 2, will we move into the contracting stage of the projects. Next slide, please, Leah. Okay, so our assistance does not end here. It's a continuous engagement that we'll be having with you, and the team will support you even in your completing of the ABC PIMP and other areas of the application. But please note that you still own your submission. The ABC PIMP is your document, right? It is not the team that is assisting you in whichever way to ensure that you complete it properly. We have had incidents where, as teams are assisting during application and we get into implementation, we get partners saying, no, but the jobs fund asked us to do it that way. No, it's an engagement, and if you've got questions that you have as you are being assisted by the team, please raise those and get to a point where you own whatever information that is going to be in that ABC PIMP. It is your document. At the close of the application process, we'll prioritize projects that have ready PIMP documents, right? And other documents. Those projects will then be assessed much sooner than those that may still have gaps that the team still need to work on for a long time to complete those ABC PIMPs and other documentation. So ensure that before you hit the submit button, you have documents that are really solid and are good enough to be assessed on their own during the due diligence process. There are key deliverable dates, which the team will then communicate with you, and there will be communication from the jobs fund soon after you've gone past your eligibility criteria. And those dates could be, the dates that the team is going to visit you, the date that you should complete your refined ABC PIMP, the dates that you should have submitted all the other documentation that is required. Those dates are as important as the closing date. Please stick to them and ensure that all submissions are done to meet the deadlines without a miss. It is so much easier to work with potential partners that respect deadlines that we work with, because for us, it is a signal that we are entering into a partnership that will be amicable going forward, and a partnership of mutual understanding that deadlines are an important aspect of implementation of any project. Please note that the support that the Jobs Fund team will be giving you at appraisal stage does not mean that it's a guarantee for approval. The approval of the applications resides with an independent committee called the Jobs Fund Investment Committee. So we will do the best that we can as teams to recommend projects, but the final decision on whether a project is approved or not does not reside with us. It is an independent governing body that finally approves a project. I think that's it from my side. All the best in your applications. If there are any questions that we may need to respond to based on the 2 slides that I've just presented, please let's engage on that. Otherwise, yeah, PD, are there any questions?
Just 1 second, just checking. I think some of the questions, there is a question from just scroll, so I'm just scrolling up here. From Tumi, is there a cutoff date for questions via email?
No. So I'm assuming you're saying once you go past the eligibility criteria, or even now, as you engage with the appraising team, there is no cutoff time right until to the time of the submission. But obviously, bear in mind that the teams will be busy with so many projects, and to drop a question at 5 minutes to 3 before submission to the team and expect them to respond, and such that you complete your submission before 3 may be difficult. So let's work in time on everything. But the answer is no, there is no cutoff time until the submission time. Any other questions?
Yeah, there is another question from Alvin. Is there an age group, an age cap on the beneficiaries on the jobs fund? Sorry, let me start it again, sorry. Is there an age cap on the beneficiaries of the jobs fund? And are people who have permanent residence permit allowed to participate?
Okay, there is, I'll try and answer that. There is no age cap for beneficiaries of the jobs fund, but obviously we would want to encourage the employment of the youth, which is where the key challenge really lies around unemployment here. Often when we get to contracting stage, we would actually have, or during the appraisal stage, we actually have engagements with the applicants and post that those that are approved on ratios on, the project is targeting so many percentages of women, such percentages of youth, and percentages of the other. So there is no cap, but there's an engagement that goes around those dynamics. And the second question was around permanent residents. I'm assuming, are you asking if permanent residents can be beneficiaries of the JOS fund? I'm not too sure what the word participate means, but the JOS fund does not exclude people who are living in this country legally. In other words, people with permanent residence may be beneficiaries of the JOS fund, depending on what the model is trying to achieve.
Okay, thanks very much, Hilton. I think that should be the last question. We have not. Yeah, I think that's the last question on the screen. I see there's a hand from Vincent. Vincent, if you may please type in your question in the chat, and then you can quickly respond to it. Okay, is there anything that I've missed? And also from Shazia, there is a hand. If you may please type in your question in the chat, then you can quickly respond. Okay, just waiting for if there's questions coming through, then we can gravitate towards. Okay, I think there was a question on the sanctions list. Not has that been responded to yet from my colleagues? Sorry, I'm juggling between two screens. There was a question on the sanctions list. Okay, my colleagues, anyone to take that one from my colleagues? What was the question specifically? Don't just get to it. The question is, how do we complete the verification sanctions screening in the FICA list? Can you please explain? Someone from the jobs from our team, legal team, wants to take that. I see, Hennes, you have responded. Maybe just you can explain it since it has come twice now.
Yes, Xavier, that is a very important question. The verification checklist is there, the FICA checklist is there for a reason, and we will do checks on everybody, including the training service providers that will be contracted via this contract. So in the checklist, you'll see that there is a document in which you need to consent to it. That document needs to be attached. We will do the FICA verifications, and then we can proceed with the contracting.
Oh, sorry. The last question from Julius. Confirm the amounts are inclusive or exclusive of VAT, and that has been responded to just now. So that is inclusive of VAT. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending the session. It has been a long journey, so to speak. We started with the briefing session. And from the briefing session, we then moved on to the training session. And today we've gone through the details of the ABC PIMP. We hope that these sessions have provided very useful information to yourselves, and it is going to help you in terms of the application process. We encourage you and we urge you to start gravitating towards finalization of your application. I think you have heard from the presenters that it is going to take time. There's so many documents required. So please do not leave it to the last minute. It is going to be a challenge. We also refer you, we recommend that you please refer to our FAQ document, which is available through the various links as shared before. In there, we have answered questions, and we are going to update that document based on today's questions. We wish you the best, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. As you can, Delia, you can move on to the next slide. You can see the contact details there. Please do contact us should you require any further clarification on the training or on the application process itself. Thank you very much, and we really appreciate your interest in participating in our funding call, taking the call to work together as we address the unemployment challenges. It is only if we can work together as the government and the private sector and the NGOs and other public entities to address this challenge that we are facing as a country, that we can make meaningful contribution to the unemployment, especially the youth. So we thank you very much. And as we do this, let's put our minds, let's put our focus on the unemployed, and let's put our best foot in our applications to ensure that we do good service to them. Thank you very much, and goodbye to all.